Have I lost my purpose as a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad? Well, now I can go be a part of somebody else's life and provide value for them to lean on. How fulfilling is that work?
That's been the most surprising part for me. You know, I had this theory that there were all these people. I just had no idea to the extent they're out there. It's just every single day we get to see the best side of humankind. On the neighbor side. And one of these investors early on said, you're not going to be able to find enough neighbors to satisfy the demand. And I said, really, you don't think there are that many nice people out there? We now have lots of data to support that absolutely there are enough people to be neighbors. But when they apply to be a neighbor, they write a paragraph about why. In every single one, I don't know if there's any other company like this, they each come with their own why built in. We're not pushing our why on them. They bring it. And we say all the time at NeighborForce, you can see my thing, More Joy, that we're inspired by joy because we are bringing joy to our clients. Now you're getting these communities that are multi-generational where younger people can help older people. And, what we say at NeighborForce is in the old days that you had that sense of community. You knew who your neighbor was and you wanted to help the older man down the street roll out the garbage cans on Tuesday mornings. It's become less close-knit.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. Now, I'm incredibly excited because we have a very special guest with us here today. Paige Wilson is joining the show. She is the CEO and founder of NeighborForce, a platform connecting seniors with neighbors and companionship and assistance. Paige, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Keenan.
Absolutely. This is going to be a lot of fun because we're going to talk about the challenge that we see in our society. I'd like to kind of bring in this little element of our conversation. In 2022, the Surgeon General came onto a national broadcast and said, the biggest challenge we're facing in society today is not another viral outbreak and a pandemic, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness.
Absolutely.
What do you think about that?
This is basically the core of what we're addressing at NeighborForce. And the way I frame it with people, you're too young to remember this. But when I was a child, the last time the Surgeon General came out with some big announcement, it was about cigarettes. You know, how cigarettes can kill you. And every cigarette pack had to have the warning label on it. Both my parents were smokers. This was a big thing. But when he came out in 2022 and talked about loneliness, what he said is loneliness is more deadly than those things, than 15 of those cigarettes. That's how monumental epidemic, that's how okay, you got to cut this one. That's how monumental this whole idea around this epidemic on loneliness. Loneliness is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
And when we're just matter of fact with that fact, it really kind of hits it home. I mean, if you think about, one of the biggest challenges that I think all of our generations face today is our addiction to these little devices. In 2021, I think there was a documentary that came out called The Social Dilemma on Netflix. And it talked about the power of these social media platforms and these little devices is not in disseminating and spreading information, but rather changing your behavior without even you noticing. A small change over a period of time can completely change how you interact with people. And it's interesting to think about how we often look for social connection in places where we're never going to find it because we've been tricked with our brains to say, ooh, likes, comments, more friend requests equal connection. But when we talk about the demographic of people who you're serving, that will never suffice.
Not at all. And, it is that false security of feeling like you're connected. Every piece of data says it's driving people apart. They're getting less connected. It's all fake. And we're using technology to actually bring people together.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So what technology have you developed? What route? Actually, let's go back to the cause. Yeah. So we've talked about the cause here, but there has to be a personal catalyst in your life where you recognized this is worth my time. This is a mission that I want to dedicate my energy towards. How do we kind of develop NeighborForce and where did the inspiration come from?
It came out of, they say that necessity is the mother of invention. Well, I invented NeighborForce because of my mother. and the necessity of what I was dealing with her. But this has been about 10 years now, but she was 75 and broke her hip. And I was very close to my mom. I lived 5 minutes from her. My mom was widowed, so she was alone. I was widowed very young, but I had a teenage daughter. And all of a sudden, when that happened, when she broke her hip, there was a period of time where she had to give up driving. You know, she couldn't with a broken hip. And then all of these little things started happening. She was pretty vibrant still, but she needed help with little things. And it was anything from getting to the beauty parlor. It might be going up in the attic and getting the bridge table down because she had friends coming over. Or the one that I laugh about now, it was not that funny then, which was, you know, reprogramming the remote. It's broken again. And I had a demanding career. I had a teenage daughter I was trying to raise by myself. And so it was hard to drop everything all of the time. And I could tell she didn't even want to ask all the time. She knew I was busy. She didn't want to feel like a burden on my time. And I started looking for a resource, for a backup, for all those little things, only to find there really was nothing. There were a lot of options. Once she needed care, a care.com or a home instead, those kind of people who are babysitting you and care. She didn't need that. At the time, what I kept saying is, I just need another me. I need a clone, you know, that could step in. So anyway, we got through it. But ultimately, a number of things, and we can talk about it later if you want, led me to the answer. I know exactly what the answer is. There are all these people in the community that if we could work it a little bit like Uber, tap them when they're available, they'd probably love to step in and be that backup. And that was the genesis of Neighbor Force. Now, what I quickly learned once it launched and we made it through COVID, yes, people need little bits of help, but what they need mostly is that connection, for sure.
This experience is the reason why I love hosting the podcast is when my guests share their stories, it's easy to find ourselves inside of their story. The shared experience that we have of having a loved one who is living on their own, I naturally went to the place of thinking about my now 91-year-old grandmother who still lives in Yakima, Washington by herself. And the biggest argument that we get into is, Grandma, you cannot be on that ladder by yourself trying to go up into the attic.
It's hard to give up that control, you know. And people say that older people want to be independent. I actually argue that's not true. We're all interdependent. What they want is to have control, to be autonomous, to be able to do it when they want it on their terms. And that's what you start giving up when you have to rely on other people or asking for your friends and family to help you. It's tough.
And it's a paradigm shift as well. You know, if I think about the process of getting older means you've gone through different seasons and chapters of your life. And when you start getting to an elderly age where, unfortunately, if you lose a loved one, you are in a place where you don't want to burden your family members, like talking about, let's come program the remote. Right. There's an intuitive nature of saying, I don't want to be a burden. My job is to kind of step back and to now manage my life as I can and let you do the things that you want to. Yeah. But like you said, there's also so many other people who need that sense of connection. It's almost like the independence or the request for autonomy is a double-edged sword, if that makes sense.
It kind of is. And, you know, people have this idolized view of aging in place. Everybody wants to stay in the home where they've raised their family. And that's great, but sometimes they don't think about some of the consequences. And some of it is they shouldn't be getting on the ladder like your grandmother. But also, as their social networks start to dwindle, and then maybe they've given up driving, how are they going to stay connected? You know, they can't get to church. They can't go to their bridge luncheon. All of those pieces they need to think about. And I think that takes a back seat.
It does. And when I think about, you know, there's statistics that talk about our aging elderly population. Mm-hmm. And so just from like a pure business perspective, your total addressable market continues to grow. Yes. So let's kind of talk about why this business model makes so much sense, like beyond the mission, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know this. You know, I went through all this with my mother, and then when she passed away, I even moved cities. It just emotionally and physically took a lot out of me. And then I started learning about this age wave. Some people call it the silver tsunami. I have learned that that's ageist because it makes it sound like it's a disaster. It's not a disaster. You know, does it have challenges? Sure. But the number that most people point to is that 10,000 baby boomers are turning 65 every single day. for the next several decades, and then that's followed by the Gen X's. But the reality is, the one that I'm more focused on, 65 is pretty darn young these days. Starting next year, 10,000 people are going to be turning 80 every day for the next several decades. So I think it's in 2031, we will have more seniors than children for the first time ever in U.S. history. Birth rates have come down. The baby boom, it was a boom, and they're all aging.
And there's another societal element that kind of compounds on top of this, which is people who are my age, I'm 33 years old, are having children later and later because of some of the psychological, I would say, limited safety. Because we think about, if I'm going to have children, it's going to be an expensive process. I have to be able to make rent. I have to pay my bills. I want to be able to raise my child properly. Right. The cost of childcare continues to rise every single year. So one of the questions that I have for you is, when we start a business to meet this need, how are we leveraging community to be able to meet the need of isolation and loneliness with our senior population? Because we're not going to be able to even build our way out of this problem, to build enough beds like assisted and, nursing homes and everything else to be able to meet this need. And they don't want to be there either.
That senior living nursing home of the past is a thing of the past. That's, they are trying to figure out better ways to do it. And there's a lot of innovation in senior living, but that's not what people want. Now you're getting these communities that are multi-generational, where younger people can help older people. And, what we say at Neighbor Force is, in the old days, that you had that sense of community. You knew who your neighbor was, and you wanted to help the older man down the street roll out the garbage cans on Tuesday mornings. It's become less close-knit. People are busier. They're behind their phones. They're in their garages. You don't know your neighbor. And so we're using technology to make it safer and simpler to get that help of a neighbor, because I live in a row house community, turn of the century homes. And so it's pretty tightly packed, and there could be somebody a block away that needs help, but how would I know, right? And how would they know to ask? So that's what we're doing with our technology.
So let's talk a little bit about the technology. So we've mentioned a great use case or a great example that people can kind of frame in their mind, which is like Uber as an example.
Yeah.
So is it the actual seniors themselves who are often saying, I need companionship and support, or who is the individual who is engaging with your platform?
Well, it is the senior many times, but more often it's their adult kids. And so you nailed it, right? You're having your kids later. And so now we have this whole sandwich generation of caregivers. They're still raising children at home, and their parents have reached the point where they need a little bit of help, and they're getting squeezed. Not to mention, their career and everything else. And so a lot of times, just like I needed backup, they're the ones that are signing. Ooh, the lights went out. Hold on.
We'll come back. There you go. You got to move a little. We need you to be a little bit more animated.
Yeah, sorry about that. Lost my train of thought there. So that sandwich caregiver, they're looking for a little bit of backup. And they're just like I was. There's this gap between when you can do everything yourself, or maybe you ask your family, friends, or neighbors for help, and then you hit that home care workers. We're bridging that gap. And so we're a huge resource to the family. We can step in for an hour here, 2 hours there, and get your mom to a last-minute dentist appointment, or sit and have lunch with dad. I just saw, it's another story, but a neighbor, we picked up a client and her dog and took them to the groomer, and then walked around the park with the dog after his nice little bath. But it's all kinds of things like that. It's what we're doing.
It's a beautiful story. I think in our previous conversation when we met each other for the first time, I asked you if you had ever heard of blue zones.
Yeah.
Blue zones, there's 5 places across the world where people live to be 100, more so than anywhere else. And they have societal commonalities like connection, resource sharing, purpose, exercise, all of these elements. And it's interesting to think about the place that we live in society today. You mentioned we're all busier than ever, but are we really? I listened to a podcast the other day that talked about a concept called the busy trap. And the busy trap is you're busy, so you can't do other things, which makes you more busy. So you fill your schedule with more tasks, and it makes you busier and busier. And unfortunately, by the time that you look up in the morning, you're waking up, you're looking at your calendar first thing, which I fall trap to. And it's like, how many things do I have to do today? And you're always trying to fill your schedule. When it comes to combating this macro problem of isolation and loneliness, it seems like we need to get a little bit less busy and we need to spend a little bit more time caring for the people around us.
We do.
I am.
In the very beginning, I had this neighbor, and I loved what he coined. He said he believed it is the ministry of being present. And that's it. That's what Neighbor Force is doing. Yes, are we helping with little tasks, but we are there connected to you. People ask if we match by personalities or skill sets or traits. Not at all. We match by proximity, so your helper is a neighbor, and people find ways to connect. It's just the human nature. So one neighbor might help somebody and they find that they both, loved the Eagles back in the day. And then the next neighbor might come and find they both play mahjong. It's amazing. They find ways to connect, and it's good.
We are secretly yearning for that sense of connection. And I love that you're using a technology platform as more of like an enablement platform to create opportunities for connection. Now, I have to ask the question, Paige. You do not exactly fit the normal avatar of a tech founder. No, so I want to kind of know, how did we tackle this big problem and why did we go down the tech route? Like, let's talk about the early journey in Neighbor Force and how we got here.
I mean, the early journey, so my whole career has been up until Neighbor Force in large corporate finance. I was the CFO of a public company, investor relations, things like that. Very well capitalized investment grade companies, very different from a startup. But, after the experience that I went through with my mother, I think it changed me. But as I mentioned, I moved cities. I took a different job. I was in investment banking then, kind of sold my soul. It was a great job. But I saw my friends going through it. I started learning all these demographics. And two things happened. And my mother by then had passed away again. That all of a sudden a light bulb went off, and I thought, I know the answer to this problem that I needed with my mom. And there was really no turning back. And so I had moved to Washington, D.C. after my mom died, took a new job there. It was great. But I wanted to get involved in the community because I had always lived in Richmond outside of my whole life, pretty much. And so I thought, well, what can I do that I don't have to make too big of a commitment, because I have a pretty demanding job. And I thought, well, I'll sign up for Meals on Wheels. Great organization. I have a soft spot for older people. Doesn't take a big commitment. Well, they were very happy to hear from me, but they needed me to commit to the same day every week because they had their routes. Well, I couldn't because of my job. I traveled a lot. So that was disappointing. And about a month later, I was talking to a friend of mine back in Richmond, and she mentioned something about driving for Uber. And I thought, wait, she'd been a lawyer. What in the world was she doing driving Uber? And what she said was, Paige, I left my law practice several years ago to finish raising our two boys, who were teenagers at the time. And she said, now they've gone off to college. I wake up in the morning and I feel like I have no purpose. I'm used to helping people, taking care of people, being needed, being connected. And she said, I'm not going back to my career. That's done. And she said, I could get a part-time job, but even if it's part-time, I still have to adhere to a schedule. And I'm 53, and I love the idea that I've earned this flexibility in my lifetime. And she said, so Uber, if I just happen to have an afternoon free, I can just go out and talk to people. And that was it, because I thought, wait a minute, I bet there are a lot of people like her or me that if they could do it when it suited their, as you say, busy schedule, we could tap them to step in and kind of be that backup daughter, to come in and help our parents and create, that connection. And that's exactly what we're doing. It is 72% of our neighbors are over age 50. They are empty nesters and retirees. On average, they do it a couple times a week for an hour or two. But they may do it for a few weeks and then say, oh, for the next 6 weeks, I'm taking care of my new grandchild. It's fine. It all works for them. So that's what we're doing, from a business perspective. Once the light bulb went off, I had to do a lot of work on sizing the market. Well, that wasn't hard. Nobody questions the demand on this. But it was clear the only way it would work is with technology, because if we're going to truly be on-demand, neighbors are available sometimes, clients only need you sometimes. You couldn't do this with dispatchers and schedulers. It would have to be more like Uber. So, no, I'm not a tech well, I am a tech founder, I guess, technically.
Yes, you are.
A non-technical tech founder. But what I did in the beginning, and I didn't realize that it was brilliant at the time, but it was, because I couldn't code, I went and got a no-code solution, so Airtable is for non-coders, and I built this little MVP that was enough to test the tech backside of it. Would clients buy into this kind of booking through tech and neighbors accepting and giving schedules and doing through tech? So on the surface, it felt technology based. Really, I was Oz sitting on my bed every Sunday night, doing this in the background. But the great news is, we operated for a year and a half on that open source software. And then we got some people to help us build further on it. And then once it was really clear that I was onto something big, then we went out and built, I can see your dog's tail wagging, built enterprise level tech platform. But because of starting with that MVP, it helped to inform on what to build. I learned in that first year and a half which parts of the technology were going to be critical and which parts weren't. So that was really helpful.
Oh man, you have the perfect intersection of lived experience,
Yep.
professional experience, understanding of what appropriate resources need to be allocated towards a problem. I love the approach that you took in going to an MVP specifically, because one of the things that we know about, I'm also in the software SaaS space, and
Yep.
one thing that we recognize is it takes twice as long and is twice as expensive for us to be able
yes,
to
it
build, right?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you really kind of leaned into, why did you choose to say, I'm going to build an MVP. We're going to prove this proof of concept. We're going to be able to build like a certain threshold of users, daily active engagements. What was that looking like?
Well, I bootstrapped the company in the beginning, but I knew it was going to take a lot of money to build the technology. So it was really, what kind of traction did I need to go out and start raising a little bit of capital to build the tech? And that's really kind of what drove the timing. And that it turned out that it was about the right timing in that 18-month period, what we were learning and how we were growing. We had revenues the very first month. And our first client, we're getting ready to hit 6 years, is still on the platform. And our first neighbor is still on the platform because that was me. I did everything in the beginning. And you were talking about the intersection. Another thing that I often talk about, especially when we started raising capital, people sometimes they want to see on your team slide that maybe I had, decades of experience in healthcare, maybe. I don't know, even though we're not really healthcare. But I actually think the fact that I did not come from healthcare is the reason NeighborForce exists, because I was able to jump the curve and just see this as something entirely different. While, yes, it helps healthcare outcomes, it's not a healthcare solution. And so anybody that's in, say, home care, they try to do home care differently and see that as being innovative, but they're doing the same thing just a little bit differently. I wasn't fettered by that or blinded by that. To me, it was clear as day.
You're getting me fired up. You're getting me fired up because this is my experience, and this is the problem that I often see. I'm a big believer in, if we're going to see the changes that our economies, our societies, our cultures deserve, it comes from the mind of an entrepreneur, because we're often an outsider. Back in 2014, I was starting my first business, and we started a telehealth company back in 2014. And I was going to all these healthcare systems and saying, there's going to be a future for virtual interactions in the healthcare experience. And all the people inside the system said, no way, never going to happen. And then something happened in March of 2020, which changed everything, which was great. But when you have that first mover advantage, you can really identify perspectives and challenges that the bigger systems themselves can't adapt to quickly. It's like turning a cruise ship when we're on a little speedboat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we've had people from the healthcare space try to replicate what we're doing, and they get it wrong because they can't get the way it works in their world out of their head. So that kind of helps us.
And I feel like there's a duality of the purpose of NeighborForce. You're not only combating isolation and loneliness, but we are also creating opportunities for purpose for, like you said, empty nesters who are like, I have a little bit extra time. Have I lost my purpose as a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad? Mm-hmm. Well, now I can go be a part of somebody else's life and provide value for them to lean on. How fulfilling is that work?
That's been the most surprising part for me. I had this theory that there were all these people. I just had no idea to the extent they're out there. It's just every single day we get to see the best side of humankind, on the neighbor side. And one of these investors early on said, you're not going to be able to find enough neighbors to satisfy the demand. And I said, really, you don't think there are that many nice people out there? We now have lots of data to support that absolutely there are enough people to be neighbors. But when they apply to be a neighbor, they write a paragraph about why. In every single one, I don't know if there's any other company like this, they each come with their own why built in. We're not pushing our why on them. They bring it. And we say all the time at Neighbor Force, you can see my thing, More Joy, that we're inspired by joy, because we are bringing joy to our clients. And my mother's name was Joy, so we were literally inspired by joy. But these neighbors, invariably, they will tell you they get more than they give, 100%. And I think I shared with you a story that kind of a bittersweet story. But as I mentioned, most of our neighbors in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, kids have gone off to college, maybe they retired, maybe they're widowed. Well, we had a man, Ken Green, that applied to be a neighbor in the summer of 2021. And I could hear his interview in the next room. Looked like a nice man, older. Went swimmingly. We got up to leave, and he reached in his pocket and pulled out a flip phone. And so the person hated to disappoint him, but said, Ken, you have to have a smartphone to be a neighbor because we run it on an app. And so he left, and, very ageist of us to think, well, that was that, right? Well, 3 hours later, the phone rings. Here's Ken Green on the line saying, I just left the Apple store. I have a new iPhone. How do you like that? 78 years old, got himself a new iPhone. Well, he started going on visits. That was summer of 2021. Went on hundreds of visits and did all kinds of things for clients until the fall of last year. In November of last year, he went on a visit. That's the one I was mentioning because you can see the notes. It says, take me and my dog to the groomer, then I want to walk around the park. He did that, and as he was getting in his car to leave the visit, he had a heart attack and died. 81. He had just turned 81. And obviously it was devastating, and we reached out to his wife and so forth. His picture in his obituary was him in front of the Neighbor Force sign. And his wife wrote us the most lovely note saying that it allowed him to heal. You never know what's going on with someone. He had lost an adult child that just tore him up about 4 years prior. And she said he died doing something that he loved and was allowed him to heal and bring him back into the world of service. Apparently he'd been a minister for 40 years. So, they're not all like that, but it just goes to show it's so important. It's so important. And there's so many people out there craving it. Good people craving it.
Oh, man. That made me a little emotional. When you think about your ability to show up for others, it's what we often give that has the biggest impact, not what we take. Wow. And when we are willing to give to others, we find fulfillment, we find purpose. And this is a prime example of that.
Yeah, the neighbors will say a lot of times that, they feel selfish, that they're getting so much out of it. They love making these connections. And for some of them, especially the younger ones, and we do have some grad students, it gives them a different appreciation for older people. And they realize, wow, these people have had some amazing lives. We have one guy here in Richmond who he doesn't have any family, so, when he needs a little bit of help, we're there for him. Turns out he was on Soul Train. His band was on Soul Train. How cool is that? We have a client in Raleigh who was the very first woman anchor on national television back in the early 70s. So, but you meet these people. There's a guy in Atlanta, he's 101. And our first visit with him was to take him to get a new laptop because he wanted to check on all of his royalties because he had published all these books on Amazon. 101. Gotta love it.
Oh man, it's I'm going to use this word intentionally. The joy that you inspire is absolutely amazing. It's just like opportunities to reconnect. And this is where I find a lot of opportunities for resiliency come from. You know, one of the biggest things that there was a study that was released and it talked about Gen Z, and I'm not casting any judge whatsoever, is one of the first generations that has the lowest level of perceived efficacy on their lives, meaning they think that somebody is going to come and save them, and they have the lowest levels of resiliency. Now, part of this is because of exactly what we're talking about here today, the common experience of when I was born, my family was from Yakima, Washington. My parents moved to Seattle. In 1997, after I was born, they moved to Detroit because there was opportunity there for them to build a life with themselves. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the missed opportunities that I had in my lived experience was spending enough time with my extended family, my grandparents, to listen to the stories that they had overcome, which then inspired and instilled messages of resiliency in us. This is so multiplicative when we talk about just the exchange of knowledge and being able to spend time with each other. We have lost a lot of the ability for those oral stories of the things that we've accomplished and the times that we've overcome to be passed down from generation to generation because we're so separated.
There are a lot of companies out there helping with that, and I even wish that I had done that with my parents, but we did 2 years ago around the holidays. We had neighbors, we outfitted them with a form, and they asked questions of the clients when they were with them. And then we made it into a little booklet for the families. And they were the kind of questions that you might not even ask your parent. And so they were lovely, you know, like, what's something that you're really proud of your daughter about, but she might not know it, you know, and then to have the mother tell that story, or, you know, something that was a fear when they were little. And, it was really cool. But that's not the core of what we do. There are companies that do that, but it's important.
Oh man, you've been able to create something so beautiful. And I can tell that there is so much passion behind what you have built. I want to ask you a little bit of a question about mindset. Now, this is something that is inspired. It's not on our framework that I provided to you, but how did you establish the mindset of grit to be able to accomplish this? Because when you're going out and you're starting to not only say, we have an impact with our MVP, but now we're going to go raise money, you come across investors and other people who don't believe in your vision. So how did you instill that level of grit in yourself to know that one day, as we sit here today, you were going to create such a big impact?
Well, I don't know. I think it's in my nature. This is just the way I am. So I don't know if you can create grit. My friends laugh because everything I do, I never do it little. I want to take up tennis, I got to win the club championship. I got to take up running, I got to, make the 18-year-old time at Boston Marathon, which I did on my first marathon. But so I definitely have it in there, and I got that from my parents. But you know what I do tell people? It is harder than I thought it was going to be. I'll tell you that. I mean, I knew it would be hard. I had no idea. And a lot of times I mentor newer entrepreneurs, less experienced. And I always tell people, if you're in this for the money, stop now. Because the chances are the money's never going to come, one. But two, more importantly, it's going to get too hard. If you're not 110% driven by what it is you're trying to solve, it'll never work. It gets too hard. And you have the doubters and all of those things. So I think that's what drives me. And I mean, we have plenty of challenges. Don't get me started there, but seeing what we're doing and knowing how absolutely necessary it is. My quote is, we can't not succeed. The double negative. We have to succeed. There are too many people counting on us. So we will.
As a founder, you are willing to go through experiences and hardship that a lot of other people can't relate with. And so my question for you is, why do you do what you do? Because there's so many other paths that we could go down. And we've touched on it a little bit, but like the purpose of your why is so important.
Well, as I said, this sounds too hokey, but I had this great job. I was making a lot of money. But all of these pieces, my personal experience, plus all of these like aha moments, like I had to do it. This is something that the world needs, didn't exist. And still, it's hard at this point because it is so new. But, and I will also say in the last 6 years, I have learned more than I learned in the first 20 some years of my career. And that's cool. It's hard. but it's cool. Every single day, it's learning something new. Failing mostly, doubting a lot, but at the end, succeeding. We're doing a lot of things right as well.
There will be years where you will doubt. You will wonder if it was all worth it. You will think if you should have taken a different path. But at the end of the day, entrepreneurship, in which I found, I just crossed as of July this year, my 10-year anniversary in being an entrepreneur and a business owner. And I've realized that the entrepreneurial experience in itself is kind of like a mirror, right? We have to look ourselves in the face. We can't lie. We have to really be honest with, are we putting in the most effort? I hosted a guy on the podcast recently. His name is Jason Yarusi. And he has an emphasis that he calls Live 100. Now, Live 100 is about applying yourself to 100% of being the best version of yourself, having the best relationships that you possibly can, being the best partner, the best boyfriend, girlfriend, dad, mom, whatever that could be. It sounds like a lot, right? But he said
I can
often
only be
we
the
live
best at one thing at a time.
I know. He says we live these lives where people will live 68% here and 91% here, but we never understand the delta of where we are compared to giving 100% of our effort. And I thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And only recently, and I think, after hitting some big challenges with the company, and we're moving past those, but it did make me step back and say, am I balancing all of this correctly? And I wasn't. And working harder doesn't necessarily make things better. Mm-hmm. You have to have that balance. So.
This gives me an opportunity to talk about a framework on the podcast, which I really haven't mentioned here before, but I've been thinking about the framework of energy depleters and energy adders. Okay, so we have experiences in our lives where we have things that take energy away from us. Those are energy depleters. Mm-hmm. But then we also have the ability to focus on energy adders. My energy adder is going to the gym. My energy adder is being able to spend time with my dog and take a walk midday. Now, I believe that it's really tough to reach a point of burnout if we spend enough time focusing on the energy adders. If we don't focus on those, we're constantly depleting from our energy reserves.
Yes.
What do you think about that energy depleters and energy adders?
I've been operating on deplete. And so I've just started adding back in those, energy adders for sure. And one is my dog. And, for instance, I haven't played tennis in 7 years. Joined my tennis team again. So excited about that. But all of those little pieces, my book club, my social, all these little pieces, extended family that took a back seat. I don't think that was the right thing to do. Not taking vacation. You have to recharge. You have to get that energy back. So I'm feeling much better about that, but absolutely. And I think for me and probably a lot of entrepreneurs, maybe the biggest depleter is self-doubt, every day. And I try to be mindful of that.
I heard a statement on a podcast the other day. I'm sorry, it wasn't a podcast. It's a book I'm reading. It's called Expert Secrets by a guy named Russell Brunson. And he talks about the process of building self-confidence. And one of the interesting things that happens as you become more and more successful, we often start to doubt ourselves more. And I think that that's really interesting because, another saying that I like to kind of reference in conversations like this is you've already accomplished things that you said were going to make you happy.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the biggest things that we experience as people with high achieving mindsets is the finish line is always moving.
Oh, it keeps moving.
And that's a really tough place to be in often.
Yeah. I call it a little bit like, children, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. The business is the same way. The bigger you get, the harder the problems and the more deep and broad the problems are. So, yeah, it never gets easier, unfortunately. I had somebody tell me years ago, it's pretty daunting when you let it sink in, but he said, today is the easiest it will be when talking about building a business. And he's right.
He's so right. I know. He's so right.
Yeah.
There was a picture, or not a picture, but my father, I've seen this picture a couple times since, but my father used to say something to me when I was growing up. He said, Keenan, you can always tell who the chief of the tribe is by the number of arrows in their back and how many times they've been hit.
Oof, yeah.
And as we get older, we get stronger, right?
Yeah.
And when I was younger, I used to think like, there's no way I'm going to be able to write this email to this prospect. But now, our problems get so much bigger and our problems and our mountains that we've climbed have become so much more greater that we now look down on some of those small problems and wonder, what was I doing kind of tripping about that back in the day?
Yeah. I follow all these videos of, great entrepreneurs, and we can debate whether he's great or not. But Elon Musk, one of the things that he says really resonates, which is, the founder is the one that always has to deal with all the worst problems. Anything that's easy, there's somebody else at the company that can take that and the fun things. It's all the stuff that's no fun and hard. That's what always ends up, on the founder's desk. So that does make it tough. But
it really does.
Yeah.
I want to ask one of my last questions here is about work-life balance.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we can both understand about being a founder of a business and a leader is often it's very difficult to turn it off. First thing I do when I wake up in the morning, people say, don't look at your phone. I have to, because I want to make sure the world isn't on fire.
Oh, yeah.
I've been trying to work with the framework of not finding work-life balance, because that's a very difficult act, but more so work-life integration.
Yeah.
What do you think about work-life integration compared to work-life balance?
Yeah. It's something I need to work on. It all falls back to that energy depleter and making, being there for the different parts of your life. I haven't been very, very successful at that, to be honest. But, I'm widowed and I'm single. And sometimes I tell myself I need to turn it off, right? But to be honest, it's what I choose to do. It's not doing it because I have to. I mean, I do have to do it. But, on the weekends when I could be doing certain other things, most of the time I'd rather be doing this. Yeah, maybe that's not healthy. And I am making room for other things, but it's hard. And yes, I know my friends are tired of hearing about neighbor force. So I try to change up the conversation from time to time. But
well, I'm incredibly blessed to be able to sit across from this virtual table with you, because I recognize that this brotherhood and sisterhood that we are in of entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart.
No.
There are so many challenges that we couldn't have even comprehended that we've overcome. And there are going to be challenges in the future that we're going to stick up to. We're going to puff out our chest. And we're going to take it on with the best of our ability. And that's all that's really important. As we kind of close here, I want to give you an opportunity, paint a picture of the future. Let's say 2-5 years of Neighbor Force. What are we anticipating?
Well, in that 2 to 5 year time frame, could be as soon as 2, but certainly within 5. Neighbor Force will be a national brand, and we'll be bringing joy to seniors across the country. And that's just step one, because this is a global issue. It's not just a U.S. issue. And the investor that led our Series A, they are global, and this is what they're viewing. That's step one. And maybe at that point it gets easier, but guess what? I don't think it will. It'll just, the challenges will just continue to grow. But what we're impatiently waiting for is really for this to click, because we know it's needed everywhere. Anybody who's been exposed to Neighbor Force and has used it is obsessed. We do these product market fit surveys, and in the industry, they tell you need 40% of your users to say they couldn't live without you. Ours is 90-some%. I mean, it's exactly what they need. And the neighbors, too. We've got this, strong on both sides. But it is a brand new white space. It's hard. White spaces are one of the more risky places to start a company. But if you get it right, it's golden. Uber was kind of like that. So that's our biggest challenge is, it's going to click. It's kind of like in the beginning when Uber came out, people said, oh, my God, I would never get in the car with a stranger, and then a couple of years passed, and then all of a sudden, how did you live without it? That's going to be Neighbor Force, just right there.
Our only objective in entrepreneurship is to never stop. And I've always tried to give myself the grace to think on longer time horizons, because when we give ourselves that long time to accomplish our goals, we give ourselves the air cover to figure out our problems, to struggle, to succeed, and to enjoy the journey. And I know that this journey is just starting for you, and I can't wait to continue to read and hear all about the things that you're going to accomplish over the next 5 years.
Well, and I'm going to need Neighbor Force for me, because I have one daughter and she doesn't live near me. So there's a little selfish piece in there, but yeah, for sure.
I'm not only building this for you, but I'm building this for my future self, and I am my ICP, which is beautiful.
Exactly.
So the last question I have from you has a tradition on the podcast here is we love our previous guests to ask you a question. Mm-hmm. Now, this question is interesting as you continue to think about building out your team, and especially in the space that you work in.
Yeah.
But how do you deal with the multiple generations in the workforce?
Ooh. Yeah, that's interesting. And we have all generations, all the way to, we have a program we call the Golden Intern Program. It's on hiatus for the summer, but we had a 70-something and an 80-something paid intern helping us. We serve older people. We need to live that vernacular. But yeah, we've got everyone from the early 20s to our golden interns. And we are an in-office company. It's all about human connection. And we're a startup, so we believe it's important. But we do have to try to figure out how to communicate with the different generations. And so we do a lot of things, mostly more social, to help people understand each other's perspective, because usually you just have to understand perspective. You don't need to change, you just need, everybody's going to look and come at things differently. So it's constant, yeah. But so far, so good. People love working at NeighborForce, so that's great. I don't think we've ever had anybody quit. We've had some people that didn't work out, but.
Well, for everybody who is watching and listening today, I just want to thank you for being that first mover, that impact leader, that person who's advocating for change, but also advocating for connection. Because like we talked about multiple times in this episode together, we need it more than ever.
We do.
So everybody who's tuning in today, Paige Wilson, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.